All right, let's just jump right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are unpacking a really fascinating concept from psychology. It's something that honestly dictates our success way more than traditional book smarts ever could. I'm talking about emotional intelligence, or EQ. We spend so much of our lives focused on logical intelligence, right? We're constantly building our resumes, sharpening our technical skills, trying to get the right degrees. But in the real world, it's actually emotional intelligence that makes or breaks our leadership abilities, the quality of our relationships, and just our long-term success in general. It is quite literally a quiet superpower.
But before we go any deeper, we actually need to clear up a pretty massive misconception. A lot of people hear EQ and they just think it means being, well, nice all the time, like you're the most bubbly, super agreeable person in the room. But reality is totally different. True emotional intelligence is a quiet superpower. It's this incredibly subtle yet profound ability to actually understand emotions, regulate your own reactions, accurately read the people around you, and respond wisely. And crucially, doing all of that when you are under serious pressure.
So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. We're going to decode the 5 subtle behaviors of high EQ. We'll hit catching the spark early, the anchor in the storm, reading between the lines, truth without the casualties, and finally, the ultimate power of EQ. And to make this really stick, we're going to use some dead simple everyday analogies for each one. Let's get started.
Starting off with number 1, catching the spark early, or noticing emotions before they boil over.
Okay, so here's our first real-life analogy. Think about a pot of water on a stove. Most people honestly don't even realize they're angry until the water is totally boiling over and just spilling everywhere, right? That's the moment they yell or they hit send on that incredibly passive-aggressive email. But emotionally intelligent people, they notice the heat while the water's just simmering. They catch that tiny spark early. They sense that little bit of tension in their shoulders, the mild irritation, or even just a small whisper of insecurity, and they catch it while it is still entirely manageable.
The psychology behind this simmering pot analogy directly links to something called self-awareness. It's essentially your ability to detect your emotional states in real time. And why does this matter so much? Because catching that emotion early gives you a massive advantage. It gives you the power of choice. If you wait until the boil, the emotion completely chooses your response for you. But if you catch it at a simmer, you are the one who gets to choose how you respond.
All right, moving on to the second behavior, which shifts the focus from our own internal state to how we deal with other people. Section 2, the anchor in the storm, staying grounded when others are chaotic.
This brings us to one of my absolute favorite analogies, the thermostat versus the thermometer. Think about it for a second. When someone around you gets rude or highly emotional or just straight up aggressive, what do? If you act like a thermometer, you're just reflecting the temperature of the room. If they get hot and angry, you get hot and angry. You literally just mirror their chaos. But an emotionally intelligent person? They act like a thermostat. A thermostat doesn't just read the room, it regulates the environment. You stay grounded, and you essentially cool the room down simply by choosing not to add any more heat to it. In the psychology world, this specific superpower is known as emotional regulation. It's your capacity to fully separate another person's emotional state from your own. People with high EQ understand a very fundamental truth. Chaos is contagious. But, and this is key, just because it's contagious doesn't mean you actually have to catch it. By acting as a thermostat, you protect your own peace. You stop yourself from absorbing and mirroring someone else's really bad day.
So, once we can regulate our own reactions, we can focus on behavior number 3, reading between the lines. Reading what people actually mean, not just what they say. To really wrap our heads around this, let's use the classic iceberg analogy. When someone is talking to you, the actual, literal words they are saying, that's just the visible tip of the iceberg sticking out above the water. It's what you can easily see, or rather hear. But as we all know with icebergs, the vast majority of the mass, the real substance, is completely hidden beneath the surface.
If we break down what is actually beneath that surface, words actually make up a surprisingly tiny slice of how we communicate. That massive remaining slice, that represents tone, timing, pauses, facial expressions, and just overall energy. High EQ people are constantly scanning that massive slice. They aren't just hearing the language, they're paying close attention to that weird hesitation before you say yes, or the totally exhausted energy behind a supposedly enthusiastic text message.
The crucial concept here is what psychologists call social perception. It's the skill of detecting the subtext that everybody else totally misses simply by reading the emotion behind the language. Like if someone says, I'm fine, but their arms are crossed tight, their tone is super flat, and they won't even look you in the eye, well, a person with high social perception definitely doesn't take "I'm fine" at face value. They read the subtext and instantly recognize that actually this person is really upset.
Okay, let's dive into behavior number 4. Truth without the casualties. Honesty without being cruel. This tackles a really tricky balance we all deal with.
For this one, let's use the analogy of a surgeon's scalpel. You see, sometimes people completely confuse being blunt with being strong. They swing their words around like a butcher's knife, just hacking away and causing all this collateral damage, all under the guise of, hey, I'm just being honest. But individuals with high EQ use their words way more like a surgeon's scalpel. A scalpel is incredibly sharp, absolutely, but it's used with pinpoint precision. And its ultimate goal is to heal, to fix a problem, not just to cut for the sake of cutting. They tell the hard truth, for sure, but they do it with a really careful awareness of the other person.
When you look at these two approaches side by side, the butcher's knife, blunt aggression basically always results in completely unnecessary damage to the relationship. But the scalpel approach, that combines assertiveness with empathy. It means you are still giving clear feedback, you are still setting firm boundaries, but you're doing it while actively considering the other person's feelings. The psychology source material notes that this specific combination consistently creates way stronger, better outcomes. You absolutely can be crystal clear without being careless.
And that brings us to our 5th and final behavior, which might honestly be the most profound. Section 5, the ultimate power of EQ. It all comes down to realizing you simply don't need to win every conflict.
Let's use our final analogy here, the traffic jam. Imagine you're stuck in terrible, gridlocked traffic. You could lay on your horn, you could scream out the window, you could get your blood pressure skyrocketing, but does any of that make the cars move even 1 second faster? No. Emotionally intelligent people treat pointless arguments exactly like a traffic jam. They realize that getting furious and fighting to win a situation that won't actually change anything is just going to exhaust them. So, they don't scream at the traffic jam, they accept the reality of it, they protect their energy, and they just move on.
What we're really talking about here is ego detachment. Because let's be real, a lot of arguments out there are entirely about ego, not truth. High EQ individuals have this amazing ability to just detach from their ego. They don't feel this burning need to chase down every single misunderstanding or force every single person to agree with them. They lean on long-term thinking over a quick, short-term ego boost. They know that, very often, choosing peace is actually a way smarter, much more strategic move than forcing some hollow victory.
So let's do a really quick rapid-fire recap of the 5 subtle behaviors we've pulled from the source material today. First, acting on the simmering pot by noticing emotions early. Second, being the thermostat and staying completely calm under pressure. Third, looking at the whole iceberg so you can read the subtext. Fourth, using the surgeon's scalpel to be honest but with empathy. And fifth, treating pointless arguments exactly like a traffic jam by refusing unnecessary conflict. These might sound like subtle little shifts, but together, they completely shape your career, your relationships, and honestly, your entire reputation.
And I think this quote beautifully sums up the core thesis of the research we've unpacked today. In the end, how you handle emotions often matters more than how smart you sound. Emotional intelligence isn't flashy. It doesn't loudly demand everyone's attention when it walks into a room. It is a quiet, steady power that consistently outperforms mere logic over the long haul.
And that brings us to the end of this explainer. But before you go, I want to leave you with a challenge to really think about. Which of these behaviors do you see most in yourself? And maybe more importantly, which one of those analogies, the simmering pot, the thermostat, the iceberg, the scalpel, or the traffic jam, do you think you need to practice just a little bit more tomorrow? Think it over. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack all of this, and I will see you next time.